Arizona, in the year 1880. In the Apache village, screams echoed through the air, mingling with the sharp cracks of gunfire. A gang of horse-riding bandits stormed in, revolvers aimed at women and children, as huts burst into flames. Horses were led away, sacks of corn and barley were looted, and several young girls were dragged outside, their cries ripping through the sky. Before the smoke could even clear, Nina, a tall Apache woman with eyes sharp as steel, had already fled down the dusty trail leading to town. Dirt clung to her sun-kissed face, but she pushed forward, knowing deep inside her tribe could not survive this alone. At the saloon in the town of Dry Hollow, Luke Brannick sat quietly in a corner booth. A rancher who had once served as a scout for the army. His face was weathered and hardened, his gray eyes cold and distant. A man with little left to lose, surviving only by instinct and the gun at his side. Nina entered, her body covered in dust and blood. Scornful eyes followed her every move, but she ignored them, heading straight for Luke's table. Her voice was hoarse, but each word landed heavy as stone. "Mr. Brannick, help us. My tribe is dying. I can offer anything, even myself, if you agree." Luke looked up, his eyes darkening. He did not answer right away, just clenched his glass tighter. In that moment, the sounds of gunfire and screaming from the plains seemed to echo back to him. A new choice was waiting: turn away, or step into the storm. The next morning, sunlight poured over the golden prairie. Luke Brannick rode alongside Nina and his two old companions, Jed Carter, a notorious gunslinger, and Matthew Sloan, a former artilleryman, as they entered Apache territory. The sight that met them left everyone silent. Charred huts, women clutching their children, trembling, and the smoldering corpses of horses. Cries of pain and sorrow filled the air, piercing the heart. Nina clenched her fists, her eyes burning with fury. A few surviving warriors glared at Luke and his companions. In the past, scouts and the Apache rarely stood on the same side. Whispers spread through the crowd. Why should we trust a white man? How are they any different from the ones who attacked us? Luke did not argue. He quietly dismounted, removed his saddle, and joined Jed and Matthew in repairing the broken fences. When a starving child wailed, Luke handed over part of his own rations. When a wounded man screamed in pain, he and Nina dressed the injuries together, using strips torn from their own shirts. Slowly, without needing many words, action began to speak louder than justification. By evening, the whole village gathered in the open clearing. Luke stood at the center, his voice raspy but unwavering. "They will come back. We cannot wait to die. From now on, this is your home, and it is mine too. We will fight together." Jed began training the young men how to handle old rifles. Matthew showed them how to set traps using ropes and spike pits. Nina led the women in building fires, forging spears from farming tools, and shaping stones into weapons. Even the elders sat weaving bowstrings. The suspicion from that morning had softened. In its place was a heavy, determined silence. Inside the large tent, as night fell, Nina sat mending a leather pouch, her strong hands trembling with exhaustion. Luke stepped in and set a bowl of hot soup in front of her. "You did not have to do this," Nina murmured. "Yes, I did," Luke answered simply. "Tomorrow, we will need both strength and faith, and you are the only one who makes them believe there is still hope." Nina froze. For years, all she had known was rejection. But now, in this quiet moment, her heart stirred for the first time in a long while. Outside, the wind kicked up red dust into the night sky. But inside the Apache village, the fire had been rekindled not just to light the darkness, but to prepare for the day of reckoning. That afternoon, the gray sky signaled the approach of a dust storm. Luke and his two companions kept their hands close to their guns, while the Apache watched every movement on the edge of the prairie with sharp, unblinking eyes. A sense of unease hung in the air. It was so quiet. The whistle of wind through the newly built fence sounded like a warning. Before long, red dust began to rise in the distance. 3 bandits on horseback came charging in, revolvers at the ready. They thought the village had already fallen. What they did not expect was that it had turned into a trap, lying in wait. Luke raised his hand. The young Apache men drew back their bowstrings, while Jed and Matthew lay in ambush behind sandbags. As the bandits drew near, an arrow shot through the air, striking the lead rider in the shoulder. He screamed and fell from his saddle. The second bandit panicked and pulled out his gun, but before he could fire, the sharp crack of Luke's Winchester rifle rang out. The bullet pierced the horse's nose cleanly, and the animal collapsed. Thrown to the ground, the man barely had time to react before two Apache warriors rushed in and pinned him down. The last rider turned to flee. Matthew calmly lit the fuse to a rope snare they had set earlier. The horse tripped, and both horse and rider tumbled into the red dust. As the man scrambled to get up, he found the cold muzzle of Jed's pistol pressed against the back of his neck. He had no choice but to drop his weapon. Cheers erupted throughout the village. Children ran out, their eyes lit with a newfound hope. The Apache now looked at Luke differently, not as an outsider, but as a true ally. Nina approached, her dark eyes shining, staring straight at Luke. "You kept your word," she said softly, her voice low and filled with emotion. Luke did not speak. He only nodded. In his heart, a fire long thought extinguished since his days in the army was burning again, not because of this small victory, but because he saw in Nina's eyes, and in the faces of the villagers, something he had lost long ago. Hope. That night, they celebrated around the fire. Venison roasted over glowing coals. Apache songs blended with the sound of Matthew's harmonica. For the first time in months, smiles returned to the faces of the tribe. But Luke's eyes remained on the horizon, where darkness swallowed the plains. He knew this was only the beginning. If those three men did not return, the rest of the gang and the one pulling the strings behind them would not let this go unpunished. In the silence of the night, Luke told himself, the real battle had only just begun. Early the next morning, mist hung low over the prairie. Luke rode alone toward the town of Dry Hollow, telling Nina he needed to see the root of this with his own eyes. Nina did not stop him. She only watched as the rancher's silhouette disappeared into the white dust, her gaze filled with both trust and worry. Dry Hollow buzzed as usual, the clang of blacksmiths' hammers, wagon wheels grinding over gravel, the crude laughter of drunks. But inside the saloon, Luke heard exactly what he needed. Two cowboys were whispering, low enough for most ears to miss, though not for someone who had once been a scout. Mr. Nash paid up front, $2,000 just to drive the Apache out of the valley. Said that land needs to be his. Yeah, and he promised a bonus to anyone who catches one of the native girls. The other man let out a wheezing laugh, rattling through yellowed teeth. Luke gripped his glass tighter, a cold flash sparking in his steel-gray eyes. Caldernash, the largest landowner in the region, had long been known for his greed, always eyeing the Apache lands. Now, he was not just trying to steal them, he was hiring outlaws to spill blood. Luke left the saloon and rode past the fields, quietly watching the Nash ranch. Strange gunmen patrolled the fences. Horses were tied in neat rows, and crates of gunpowder sat stacked behind the stables. The place looked less like a ranch, and more like a fortress preparing for war. That night, Luke returned to the village. Jed and Matthew were checking weapons, while the villagers trained under the moonlight, practicing with bows and crossbows. Nina came out to greet him. One look at Luke's face, and her heart sank. "Is someone behind all this?" she asked, her voice rough with concern. Luke nodded slowly. "Caldernash. He wants your land, and he will not stop until you are gone." A wave of fury swept through the village. One young warrior shouted, "Let's kill him tonight." But Luke raised his hand to stop him, his voice firm. "If we rush in now, we are handing him our lives. He has money, he has guns, but if we prepare, we might be able to turn the tide." Nina looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion, but steeled with resolve. "You are not going to leave, are you?" Luke replied, his voice low and gravelly, yet certain. "No, I have seen many battlefields in my life, but this time, I am staying. For you, for the village." The fire in Nina's eyes flared to life. Deep inside, she understood. This was no longer just the tribe's fight. This was a battle for all those who had been pushed to the edge, and now they had found someone to lead them. "I am truly grateful that you are here. If this story reminded you of days gone by, those dusty afternoons, the echo of hooves stirring something in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit together again, and I will tell you another story from the Wild West." 3 days later, before the sun had fully risen, the prairie thundered with the sound of hooves. In the distance, red dust billowed high into the air this time. The enemy was far larger. Calder Nash was no longer sending just a few outlaws to test the waters. Now, he brought over a dozen professional gunmen, their rifles gleaming in the first light of dawn. Inside the village, drums pounded in warning. Luke, Jed, and Matthew had already prepared the defenses. Trap pits were covered with leaves, wooden barricades reinforced tightly. The Apache villagers stood with spears in hand, eyes fixed on the approaching threat. There was no more trembling like before. This time, they were ready to hold their ground. Nash rode at the front of the column, his voice booming with scorn. "This land is mine. If you leave peacefully, I will let you live. If not, do not say I did not warn you." Luke stepped forward, Winchester in hand, his steel-gray gaze locked onto Nash. "This land does not belong to you. And tonight, it will not change hands." A shout rang out, and Nash's men opened fire. Bullets slammed into the barricades, kicking up clouds of dirt. The Apache fired back from behind sandbags, arrows slicing through the air. One rider fell, then another, blood staining the dry grass red. Jed sprang from cover, his revolvers barking in rapid bursts. Matthew, with his artilleryman's instincts, hurled a flaming barrel of oil toward the advancing gunman. The fire exploded, forcing the attackers to scatter and throwing their formation into chaos. Nash roared in fury. "Move in! Wipe them out!" The battle raged until the sun had fully climbed the sky. Many Apache warriors fell, their blood soaking into the cracked earth. But Nash's forces suffered heavy losses as well. Nearly half of his gunmen were taken down, and the rest, shaken, broke ranks and fled. Nash was forced to retreat, but before he disappeared over the hill, he turned and bellowed, "This is not over. I will return, and next time, there will be no graves left for your dead." Smoke still curled from the scorched remains of village huts. Children wailed. Women clung to fallen loved ones and screamed in anguish. Nina sat on the ground, blood staining her arm, but her eyes still burned bright. She looked at Luke, her voice hoarse but steady. "He will come back. We cannot just wait." Luke knelt beside her, his calloused hand resting on her shoulder, his steel-gray eyes filled with resolve. "You are right. Next time, we will not just defend. We will bring the fight to his doorstep." After the night of Nash's attack, the Apache village fell into a mournful silence. The dead were wrapped in animal hide blankets and carried to the tribal burial ground. Small fires burned in the wind, smoke rising like whispers of farewell. No one wept aloud, but every pair of eyes was red, filled with grief and rage. Luke stood with Elder Nantan atop a grassy hill, the pale morning sun casting a golden hue across their faces. Nantan spoke with a heavy voice. "We have lost too much, but if we wait, he will return stronger. We are ready to follow you." Luke nodded. In his heart, he knew there was only one path forward: to bring the war directly to Nash's ranch. But to do that, they would need discipline. They would need a plan. The next day, the entire village transformed into a training camp. Jed taught the young Apache how to use revolvers, correcting even the smallest mistakes in their grip. Matthew demonstrated how to craft explosives using pitch oil and gunpowder, packing them into clay jars. "Toss one of these into Nash's grain store," Matthew said with a grim smile, "and he will learn the true scent of war." Nina led a group of women, teaching them to handle knives and short bows. She refused to let anyone remain idle. In the firelight, her tall frame stood strong, eyes ablaze as she called out, "We are no longer the weak. We will reclaim the honor of our tribe." Meanwhile, Luke pored over maps, sketching every ridge and stream that led to Nash's ranch. He knew Nash had over 20 hired gunmen, high wooden walls, and a fortified stable. But Luke had once been a scout. He understood better than anyone that the land itself could be the greatest weapon. At night, while the village rested, Luke sat alone beside the fire. Nina approached and handed him a bowl of hot soup. As he looked up, he saw a fierce trust in her eyes. Her voice was soft, almost like a vow. "We are putting our lives in your hands. Do not let us die for nothing." Luke said nothing, but he gripped her hand firmly. In that moment, all the loneliness, all the brutal memories of his past, seemed to find a place to rest. 3 days later, just as the first light of dawn broke the horizon, the group was ready. The Apache carried spears and old rifles. Jed and Matthew brought barrels of oil and coils of rope. Luke rode at the front, his Winchester gleaming across his back. As he looked around, he saw the entire village standing behind him. "Tonight," Luke said, his voice resolute, "we will no longer be the hunted. We will be the ones who write our own fate." A thunderous cheer echoed across the cliffs. Torches were lit, turning the night into a glowing red curtain. The counterattack had officially begun. Night fell heavily over the arid land. A sliver of a crescent moon hung like a silver blade, dimly lighting the clouds that drifted across the sky. Calder Nash's ranch burned brightly with torchlight. Guards patrolled the grounds, and dogs barked relentlessly. Nash was confident he believed the Apache would not dare return after the massacre. But hidden in the shadows along the mountain slope, Luke and his group waited in silence. He pointed with purpose. Jed carried jars of oil, Matthew held explosives, and Nina, along with a group of Apache warriors, readied arrows dipped in pine resin. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the signal. "Remember this," Luke whispered, his voice steady and sharp. "We are not here to die. We are here to win." The call of an owl echoed through the night. It was the signal to strike. A flurry of flaming arrows shot through the air, igniting the grain stores. Fire erupted violently, spreading like a red beast. Dogs howled. Nash's men scrambled in chaos. At that moment, Jed hurled an oil jar onto the wooden fence, and flames roared even higher. "Move in," Luke shouted. The crack of the Winchester echoed. Matthew took down 2 riflemen from the watchtower. The Apache surged in from all sides, war drums pounding in rhythm with the cries of battle. Nash bellowed, rallying his loyal gunmen. He still wore his wolfskin cloak, a silver-plated Colt in hand, eyes wild like a beast cornered. Through the smoke and flames, Nina charged like a shadow, her blade flashing. She brought down a burly thug who had aimed his gun at children locked in the stables. Apache women stormed in behind her, dragging the captives to safety. Chaos turned into a desperate battle for survival. Elsewhere, Matthew lit the fuse on a clay jar and hurled it into Nash's horse stables where dozens of war horses were kept, his tools of intimidation. The explosion shook the ground, horses screamed, and the wooden walls came crashing down. Nash's entire force reeled from the blast. Calder Nash screamed, pointing his gun straight at Luke. The 2 men faced each other in the heart of the firestorm. Luke stepped forward, calm and unflinching, his gray eyes cold as steel. A shot rang out, the bullet tore through the brim of his hat. Without hesitation, Luke raised his Winchester and fired. The bullet struck Nash's hand, and he collapsed. The air was thick with tension. Villagers, warriors, and Luke's companions stood around them. Everyone wanted justice, wanted to end the man who had brought so much death. The cries for vengeance roared. Luke raised his hand to stop them. He looked around, then turned to Nina. "He made your people suffer. Kill him or spare him, the choice is yours." A hush fell over the crowd. Nina walked slowly toward Nash, her eyes dark and deep as a canyon. She could have easily drawn her knife and ended him, but after a long pause, her hand dropped to her side. Her voice rang out, strong and unwavering. "Blood for blood will only keep us enemies forever. He will pay, but through justice." Silence gave way to thunderous shouts from the villagers. Nash was bound and dragged into the courtyard, stripped of all power. He shrank, his eyes wide with panic as the words of judgment echoed around him. The battle was over. That night, Calder Nash's ranch burned to the ground, the red flames painting the Arizona sky, marking the end of a tyrant. Dawn broke over the Arizona prairie, painting the sky a soft pink after a night of blazing red. Where the proud ranch of Calder Nash once stood, there was now only ash and rising smoke. The Apache gathered once more, their faces weary, but their eyes alight. They had reclaimed justice not through pleading, but through unity and strength. Luke sat on a stone step, removing his ash-covered cowboy hat and wiping dried blood from his cheek. Jed and Matthew walked over, both worn to the bone from battle, but grinning through the exhaustion. "We are getting old." "Luke." Jed sighed. "Yeah," Matthew added. "But last night, we fought like we were 20 again." Luke gave a quiet chuckle, his eyes drifting toward Nina. Nina stood by the creek, helping the Apache women tend to the wounded and wash away the soot of war. Her long hair was damp with sweat and smoke, but in the morning light, she looked more radiant than ever. When she turned and met Luke's gaze, she simply nodded a silent acknowledgement. More powerful than 1,000 words. Elder Nantan approached and placed a firm hand on Luke's shoulder. You did not just save our tribe. You gave us back our hope. From this day on, the doors of our village will always be open to you." The words caught in Luke's throat. After years of drifting, knowing only the saddle and the gun, for the first time he felt like he had a place to belong. That evening, the Apache held a celebration. Drums and songs echoed across the prairie. The bonfire roared, children danced hand in hand, and the elders recounted the victory of the night before. Luke sat by the fire, Nina beside him. When she handed him a cup of corn whiskey, their hands brushed, and this time, neither pulled away. Nina spoke softly, like the whisper of wind. "You can leave, like you always have. But if you stay, you will have a home." Luke looked deep into her eyes, then toward the children laughing, and the people who had fought by his side. A quiet voice rose inside him. Enough wandering. It was time to stay. He took Nina's hand and held it tightly. No grand promises were needed, just that single gesture, enough to say that from now on, they would walk forward together. As the night drew to a close, the bonfire flared one last time, casting tall shadows of the two sitting side by side, silent but unshakable. On land once stained by blood and gunpowder, a new love had taken root, along with hope for the days ahead. From a lonely rancher and a wounded Apache woman, they now had something greater than themselves: a home, a family, and a place to truly belong. In the harsh lands of the Wild West, the law often belongs to the strong, and justice is as fragile as smoke in the wind. But there are always ordinary people who stand up when others bow down. They are not glorified heroes. They wear no armor, seek no fame. They have only calloused hands, an old rifle, and a heart that refuses to let injustice win. Those who choose to defend what is right often pay the highest price, mocked, threatened, even facing death. But they are the ones who change the fate of a whole community. Because when one person stands up, they give others the belief that what is right still has a place in this dusty world. That kind of courage does not come from being fearless. It comes from walking forward despite the fear. And sometimes, all it takes is one person saying no, and an entire village, an entire tribe, and even future generations can live in freedom and fairness. It has been an honor to share this journey with you, the loyal audience of Wild West storytelling. I hope you find joy and peace in your own lives. I love you all. Tell me, how did this story make you feel? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales of the Wild West.